And then I'll switch to the exegesis, and you guys can just tiptoe out or do whatever you want.
Okay, sounds good. So, yeah. Yeah, that's what we're getting to now. Yeah, for sure, because we got 20 minutes. Okay, so let's go back to the connection between the movement from Division 1 to Division 2 and from skills, basic skills to
okay, right.
On the more broad level.
So after the sort of collapse of both artificial intelligence, which tried to do common sense knowledge, and expert systems work, which tried to do expertise for people who didn't need common sense knowledge, experts in isolated domains, which I would have thought might work, but it didn't work. And then that's when my brother discovered that's because experts don't follow rules, and even if you have an expert that's utterly isolated from common sense knowledge, like blood disease diagnosis or loan making on the basis of facts and so forth, you can make expert systems like that, and they'll be competent, but it turns out that experts in any domain with lots of experience become more flexible and more able to respond to each unique situation than one would have thought. So, but that was the end of that. And Heidegger knew all that, and I tried to explain how Heidegger knew all that. But then that's only the first half of being in time. The second half of being in time is how to lead a good life. It's about it's about what Heidegger calls authenticity, which is probably better translated something like owning your life or disowning your life, or owning up to what it is to be a human being, or as opposed to hiding what it is to be a human being. And so I got interested in what the best form of human life was, what human flourishing was. And it turns out to be not unrelated to the expertise, because it's really one step beyond the expert. The question is, what is a master of human being? And that's what Heidegger got onto in the second half. And he did it by way of Aristotle, who describes what he calls in Greek the phronomos, what people translate the man of practical wisdom. Of course, woman could do it too, a person with practical wisdom. And Heidegger gave several years of courses on this and condensed it into this second edition of Being in Time. And then, okay. So now we want to know what is phronesis, what is practical wisdom, what is a life that is flourishing. And it turns out, Heidegger says, following Aristotle, that the person of practical wisdom does the appropriate thing at the appropriate time in the appropriate way. And that means that Aristotle says they've got to have lots of experience, and they've got to be raised in a good family, and they've got to be in a good culture. It's all extremely sensible. And what he doesn't say, what I want to add, which has been absent from my talk about experts and is very important when you get to masters, like we're talking about now, is that the person who becomes a master has to do something that the expert doesn't do. The expert rests on their laurels. They get around in the world of familiarity in a way that is so totally like flow, in which they just cope with what everything calls them to do, and thereby intuitively respond well. But the one thing that the master does. Oh no, I have to say one more thing. And even to become an expert, you already have to take risks. You learn from your mistakes. If you don't make mistakes, then you just do the same thing again when you're in that situation or a similar situation. You'll make some similar mistake. So the expert has to, in some way, to become an expert, you have to be able to sort of recall and relive and learn from what went wrong. And that's fine. But there's something more required to be a master. And that is, once you get to be an expert, most people just can rest on their laurels about that. And everybody can, as far as being an expert driver, being an expert at getting around in buildings and getting across even busy streets. We're all experts. But in these domains of music or sports, or in my business, teaching, there are certain people who are recognized as better than experts, namely masters. And how did they get that way? Well, they have to continually worry about what they've done and feel good about what they do when it's succeeded, and feel bad about it when it fails. And only if and why would they do that? Well, that's the new element that Aristotle does have it too. They have to be committed, in Aristotle language, to the goods of the practice. That means that you've got to care about teaching, so that you do feel bad when things go wrong, and you discover that you wasted an hour following out a line that the students were leading you down that got nobody anywhere, and they're all confused. And you've got to feel good when they went step by step until they discovered on their own what you were going to tell them anyway, and that's terrific. And even better when everybody learned something new that they didn't even know and didn't know they were going to learn. So what is the moral of this? That you've got to be committed to the good of the practice, whatever it is, law, medicine, teaching, being a mother, anything. Committed to the good of the practice, and thereby constantly get feedback as to whether what you've done was good or not. And that means constantly leading a risky sort of life, because if you undertake things and you can fail at them, and you can feel very bad at failing at them, but if you won't take that risk, you won't get to be a master. That much I got out of Aristotle. But Aristotle didn't have a further problem, that namely his culture was all clear and settled. You could count on a shared background understanding of what was the appropriate thing to do at the appropriate time, and do it in the appropriate way, and what is a good family, and so forth. But we're now in a different kind of culture, this multiculture, this kind of pluralism in which there isn't any clear answer to what is the appropriate thing to do in any situation, and so forth. And it's hard to become a master at a culture if the culture hasn't got any guidelines in it anymore as to what's worth doing and what's worthy and what's not worthy. And so then, and Heidegger...
It's okay, hold on, stop.
Yeah.
Go ahead in.
Yeah, if you want to, yeah, I'm not going to keep people from using their computer. Are you going to compute or print?
I'm going to print, actually. It's going to be very fast, just 10 pages.
Okay.
Okay, go right ahead.
Okay,
thank you for section.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Go on until he starts printing.
Okay, so we don't have these clear distinctions anymore built in about what's worthy and not worthy, holy and not holy, honorable and not honorable. We don't know, different cultures, and Heidegger discovers this. That's the important thing. In Being and Time, he only gets up to what the phronimos, the man of practical wisdom, in a culture in which it's clear what you should do and how you get to do it, and that's fine. But he discovers that there's something else. There's nihilism going on now. Nihilism meaning that nobody knows anymore what's worth doing, what's meaningful, and so forth. I just discussed with the students, because they're all supposed to be watching a movie called The Ice Storm, in which the kid in the ice storm sees that everybody, it's in the 70s, sees that nobody knows what to do. Their parents are experimenting with sex by having key parties, and the kids are having their own experiments. And the comic book that is the commentary on this says the vacuum grows. Heidegger would have said, and I think T.S. Eliot says the wilderness grows. And Nietzsche also says it. I mean, there's the sense that things, not only that there is this kind of meaninglessness, this what the students said was void. Then they don't say vacuum, and they didn't say nihilism, but somehow when they thought about their lives, they did think that there was some kind of void. These are the freshmen I was talking to. And then people do things sort of desperately to fill the void, and they talked about that. Facebook and the World of Warcraft and so forth are their ways of filling the void, and they think that their parents fill the void with Second Life and other things that they're not interested in, and probably sitcoms and so forth. But there is this problem that there seems to be a lack of meaning, and that another way to describe it is the death of God in Nietzsche talk. That is, there was once a system in which God had created the world and determined what was right and wrong, and people, all they had to do was do what God said was right and not what was wrong, and they would have good lives. That doesn't work anymore for most people. And when it does work for them, I'm afraid they may well become fanatics because they're not secure anymore that there's a God and that they know what's right and wrong. So they go even overboard as if they knew for sure that there was a God and that they knew what was right and wrong. And the question is, Heidegger got more and more worried about how we can live in this nihilistic situation in which the old values were not working anymore. And he tried various ideas, and he thought we had to wait for a new God to come along, and that would be like a different, each stage, and he saw that there was a whole series of stages in the history of the West in which they had different understandings of God and different understandings of what it was to be a human being, but they always had some answer. So the Greeks understood that you could either be a hero or you could be a slave. The medieval Christians understood that people could either be saints or sinners, and the modern Cartesians understood that they could either become self-responsible, independent subjects dealing with objects, and then now, and Kant added that was a kind of maturity if you could be free and assume responsibility for your life. All of those have failed. I mean, they didn't fail. They had their time and they worked for people, but they don't work anymore. And so what can you give people as a sense of how to lead a life that is meaningful and fulfilling and memorable, to give you memorable meaning, not just sort of the kind of meaning you might get by winning the World of Warcraft. And Heidegger then came up with his own interesting version of this. It's got to be something that has something in it which is like what the gods did for the previous epochs, something outside of one's free choice, outside of your just deciding to give it meaning. Because if you freely choose it, it doesn't have any grip on you, and you can just freely unchoose it. It's got to be some authority that's got some, and you can't just what was I going to say? Something I've forgotten now. It's got to be an authority outside of you that makes a claim on you. You can't freely choose it, or it won't do that. I'll remember as I talk. So in any case, so what could that be? Well, Heidegger, who's always very original and looking around for something new, understood that it was always the role of God to do that. And then he got interested in Homeric Greece, where it was the role of the various gods to do that. And then he saw that the gods were what he calls the attuning ones, and that is, they made people sensitive to moods. And he began to think moods aren't these inner, fleeting experiences. Moods are mostly shared events, like the mood in the class, or the mood in the party, or the mood in the town, or he thought the whole mood of the current epoch there was such a mood. In any case, he thought that the Greek gods were like moods. Aphrodite was the erotic mood, and Ares was the aggressive mood, and so forth, and that these moods took over people, And when these moods took over people, then the people understood what was worth doing. Helen understood that it was worth running off with Paris, even though she left her husband and her newborn child. And Achilles knew that it was worth dying young if you were if the trade-off was you could fight furiously, but then you were going to lead a short and glorious life, and he chose that. So Heidegger saw that if you took moods seriously, like the Homeric Greeks did, you could have memorable meaning in your life. But he also saw that that wasn't going to, that we can't just go back to being like the Homeric Greeks. And he talks about luring, well, it's a phrase of Melville's, but it could have been a phrase of Heidegger's, luring back the gods. And that poets help us do it. But that's all very obscure. And he doesn't understand too well himself. He would be the first, I think, to say what that would be for us, because it's got to be, I mean, we're not going to go believing in Aphrodite and Ares and that they live on Olympus and so forth. So, and even we're not going to be a culture that says, just go with your mood, never mind free choice and responsibility. We need something new, and his idea was that we should have what he called things thinging, which is a very strange thing to say. Another philosopher.
Yeah. Swap these cards.